Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really quite remarkable source, a Tibetan Buddhist guidebook. It explores something fundamental we all face: life, death, and what might come next.
That's right. And the book we're digging into today, it offers this incredibly detailed perspective. It basically argues that our state of mind, right now, while we're alive, that's the single most crucial factor shaping our experience of dying, death, and whatever follows.
It really is like a roadmap, isn't it? But like for your consciousness, so our mission today is to unpack the key concepts presented in this source. We want to pull out the surprising details, really practical insights, and kind of help you grasp this deep topic without feeling, well, totally overwhelmed.
Yeah, make it accessible.
Exactly. Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding these ancient teachings. Let's jump right in.
Absolutely. So the source starts, very logically, with human life itself. And it presents a view that might sound a bit paradoxical at first. Life is described as precious, incredibly full of potential.
Which sounds great.
Right. But also undeniably impermanent and filled with unavoidable suffering.
Ah, okay.
Ah.
So you get the precious potential bit and you think, fantastic.
Mhm.
But then the book immediately hits you with the fleeting nature of it all and the suffering. It points out that even with all the potential for enjoyment, for attainment, life just swings, doesn't it, between positive and negative experiences, and often leaves you with this sort of persistent sense of incompleteness.
Exactly. It's inherently fleeting. And ultimately, if you're just focused on chasing external things, status, possessions,
Yeah.
it feels unsatisfying deep down.
And that leads directly to the book's view on our real nature. Right?
It does. It suggests that deep down, beneath all the turbulence, we possess a pure, fundamentally positive nature. And here's where it gets really interesting and kind of practical, too.
Mhm.
Our mind isn't a single, solid, fixed stream you're just stuck with.
Not set in stone.
Not at all. Every single moment is actually an opportunity, a chance to change the direction, the quality of our mind through, well, spiritual training.
Okay, so here's a key nugget from the source that really flips things on their head, I think. Thinking about impermanence isn't just some gloomy philosophical exercise. The book says it's actually a powerful tool.
Exactly right. By contemplating how fleeting the things we desperately crave are, like youth, possessions, social status, the source says it helps to dissolve those negative emotions, that grasping attachment.
But hang on, how does just thinking about my car eventually rusting make me happier now? I mean,
Well, it's because the suffering often comes not just from, say, eventually losing the car, but from the grasping at it, the constant low-level fear of loss, maybe. By recognizing its impermanent nature from the start, the intensity of that grasping, that clinging, it lessens.
okay. Less clinging, less suffering tied to it.
Precisely. And when craving and attachment lessen, the suffering tied to them diminishes too, and you're left with potentially a greater appreciation for what is right now, alongside maybe a deeper sense of contentment. The source even points out, that sadness itself is impermanent. And just recognizing that can sometimes lift the weight of sorrow a bit.
That shift in perspective is powerful, really powerful, and it ties directly into the concept of karma, which, as the source points out, is often really misunderstood in the West. It's not just fate or some kind of cosmic punishment, is it?
No, not at all. The source clarifies that karma refers to all intentional actions, positive, negative, or even neutral. It's essentially the principle of cause and effect, but driven by intention.
Right, the intention matters.
Yes.
And the mechanics of that are crucial here. The book lays out the root cause. It identifies it as grasping at self. This fundamental misperception, this idea of a solid, independent me.
Yeah, that me that needs protecting and pleasing all the time.
Exactly. That grasping ignites craving, which the book says is either intensely liking or intensely disliking something. And that, in turn, triggers what the source calls the three poisons.
Right, the classic three poisons. Confusion or ignorance, that basic lack of understanding of reality. Greed, which is attachment, wanting more, clinging.
Yeah.
And aggression, which covers hatred, aversion, pushing away.
So from these poisoned states of mind, we then form karmas, actions, through our three doors. Our mind, so our thoughts and intentions,
Yeah.
our speech, what we say, and our body, our physical actions, everything we experience, the source really emphasizes this, stems from this cycle.
Mm.
And it's all rooted in our own mental perception, and actions.
And it's all interconnected. The source also briefly mentions dependent origination.
Right, the idea that all things are interlinked, arising and functioning based on one another.
Exactly. It reinforces that our experiences don't just happen to us randomly, out of the blue. They arise in dependence on causes and conditions. And crucially, many of those conditions are created by our own karma, our intentional actions, driven by that grasping and the three poisons. It's all part of this vast interconnected web where our internal state really does shape our external reality.
And this cycle brings us, inevitably, face to face with suffering. The book talks about the first noble truth of Buddhism, and it goes beyond the obvious physical and mental pain, the suffering of suffering. There is also the more subtle suffering produced by change.
Yeah, that's that inherent anxiety, isn't it? That feeling that even good things won't last, or worse, that they'll actively turn bad. Like the classic example, your successful investment causing ulcers.
Oof, yes. Relatable on perhaps a different level, but
Yeah.
yeah. But it goes even deeper, doesn't it? There's the all-pervasive suffering.
Yes. This is the subtle, inherent dissatisfaction within conditioned existence itself, samsara. Because all compounded things, basically everything that arises from causes and conditions, is subject to change, decay, and ultimately dissolution. Nothing within this cycle, samsara, is truly, lastingly satisfying. The source even notes that even beings in seemingly ideal states, like gods and god realms, they still suffer, especially when their good karma runs out and they face rebirth in a lower realm.
So understanding this reality of suffering, it isn't meant to be depressing, is it? Why is the book presenting it as so crucial in this context, especially leading up to death?
Because these karmic patterns, fueled by our grasping and what the source calls the six root afflictions, hatred, greed, ignorance, desire, jealousy, arrogance, those are the things that bind us. They bind us to endless wandering in what are called the six realms of samsara.
Okay, the six realms: hell, hungry ghost, animal, human, demigod, and god realms, which the book presents not just as like physical places, but states of existence, tied to predominant emotional states, right?
Precisely. The source directly links specific predominant emotions or afflictions to rebirth in specific realms. So, intense hatred, for instance, can wipe in as the cause for rebirth in a hell realm. Intense greed can lead to a hungry ghost realm, deep ignorance to an animal realm, and so on.
Okay, that's the potentially heavy part, being kind of trapped by our own habits and emotions. But the great news the source emphasizes is that we do possess Buddha nature, that pure potential.
Yes, absolutely. It's often obscured by all this emotional turbulence, the static, but it's fundamentally there. The ultimate goal, then, is liberation from this cycle. Freedom.
In the path.
The path, as laid out in the book, involves, well, first recognizing our current negative or turbulent state, seeing it clearly, then actively training in positive states, things like peace, joy, love, compassion, purifying those negative patterns we've built up, and ultimately awakening that enlightened nature that's already within us. Meditation is highlighted again and again as a key tool to stabilize the mind and realize our true nature.
So life is this precious, fleeting, often turbulent opportunity, shaped profoundly by our mind and actions. What happens when that opportunity comes to an end? The book calls the process of dying the crucial hour.
Yes. And it details this incredibly fascinating step-by-step process of dissolution. It describes how the physical body's elements, earth, water, fire, and air, dissolve sequentially into one another. And this affects both the physical body and the consciousness experiencing it.
And the source gives really specific sensory experiences associated with each stage. It's like a preview, almost, of what the dying person might go through. As the earth element dissolves into water, for example, you might feel a great heaviness, intense thirst, see smoke-like visions.
Yeah, very vivid descriptions. Then, as water dissolves into fire, you might feel a sense of suffocation, maybe heat, and see shimmering red sparks like fireflies. As fire dissolves into air, body heat disperses. Interestingly, it says often from the feet up for those who have cultivated virtue, or head down for those with predominantly negative karma, and you lose the ability to see external objects visually.
And finally, as the air element dissolves into consciousness itself.
All external perception fades. You lose access to ordinary light, entering a deep, subtle darkness or state of unconsciousness for most. What's absolutely crucial here, and the book stresses this repeatedly, is that the subjective experience of this whole process and everything that comes after depends solely on the state of mind you cultivated during life.
Wow. So direct.
Incredibly direct. A peaceful, joyful mind leads to peaceful experiences of dissolution. A mind full of fear, anger, regret leads to negative, frightening ones.
That connection is so stark. Life training dictates the death experience. The book also talks about the mind eventually exiting the body through one of 10 doors or openings, like the mouth, ears, eyes, nostrils, anus, genitals, and crucially, the cranial aperture at the top of the head.
That's right. Exiting through the upper doors is associated with higher, more fortunate rebirths. And the source mentions that dedicated meditators actually train for this, often through a specific practice called phawa, which means consciousness transference. They train to consciously block the lower doors and guide their consciousness to exit specifically through the cranial aperture, aiming for a pure land or positive rebirth.
Okay, so after the dissolution process and the mind exiting the body comes the Bardo, the transitional passage, right, between death and the next rebirth. And the source shares glimpses of this state, apparently from meditators known as D-logs.
Yes, D-logs, literally meaning those who have returned from death. People said to have had profound near-death experiences, traveled through the Bardo, and then returned to recount them.
And their accounts, whether they describe seeing terrifying hellish realms or sublime pure lands, the source presents these not as objective external places you go to, but as reflections.
Exactly. Reflections of their own karmic tendencies, their mental habits, their belief systems, entirely shaped and projected by their own mind in that state. The book compares it to a vivid dream journey. The mind generates these experiences based on the imprints left from life.
So the Bardo reality, according to the book, isn't some fixed external landscape, but a world fundamentally composed of thought.
That's the description. Without a dense physical body, beings can apparently travel instantly just by thinking about a place. But this intense mental reality can also be incredibly overwhelming. It can lead to feelings of being scared, exhausted, utterly alone, maybe assaulted by your own mental projections.
But this is where the living can actively help.
Yes, that's a key point in the source. It explains that meditation, prayers, and especially strong, compassionate thoughts generated by friends and family on behalf of the deceased can actually reach and assist beings in the Bardo, because in that subtle state, they're said to be highly receptive and sensitive to such mental energies.
Okay, and here's a really crucial insight from the source about those Bardo experiences, especially the scary ones. Any unpleasant appearances you might encounter, terrifying figures, harsh landscapes, are presented as fabrications of your own mind.
Unreal and insubstantial, like dream images.
And fundamentally peaceful in their true nature, if you can see through the projection.
That's the teaching. The book states that by thinking and feeling the right way with recognition, with the right view, remembering their empty nature, you can potentially transform any frightening situation. Recognize it as your own mind's display.
That's a profoundly empowering message for navigating that state. The book also warns strongly against attachment, though. It says, do not get attached to visions of loved ones or possessions or familiar places you might see there.
Yeah, it's quite direct about that. These are explicitly identified as reflections of your own residual attachment, your fear, your confusion from life. And if you grasp onto them, they become obstructions, obstacles to finding a better path towards liberation or higher rebirth.
So instead of grasping, the advice is
to perceive things differently. Sounds heard in the Bardo can be perceived, for instance, as waves of blessing or devotional energy. Lights seen can be recognized as the blessing light of peace and joy, maybe from enlightened beings. It's all about how you choose to perceive and react, which, again, ties right back to the mental habits trained during life.
Okay, and this leads directly to the idea of transforming our future and also helping the departed, right? The book really hammers home this point. Hellish realms, pure lands, they are not external places you were sent to.
No. They're presented consistently as reflections of our own cultivated karmic tendencies, positive or negative, manifestations of our mind.
Which the source presents as actually great news, because it means we can absolutely transform our future. We can do it while we are alive, right now.
Exactly. By cultivating positive karmas, practicing love, generosity, patience, wisdom, humility, we create the merits, the positive potential that leads to happy future lives and rebirths in higher realms.
And purification practices are also highlighted as vital for cleaning up the negative stuff we've accumulated.
Absolutely vital. The source mentions specific traditional practices like the confession before the 35 Buddhas and Vajrasattva meditation. It explains that these typically work through what are called the four powers. There's the power of reliance, trusting in a source of purification, like a Buddha or your own Buddha nature. The power of repentance, genuine regret for misdeeds, not guilt, but a clear seeing of harm. The power of commitment, sincerely promising not to repeat those misdeeds. And the power of the remedy itself, the actual purification practice, often involving visualization of cleansing light or nectar washing away negativities.
And dedication of merits is presented as essential too, particularly for helping those in the Bardo.
Very much so. Dedicating merits the positive energy generated through your own practice, or even reflecting on the past virtues of the deceased person. Dedicating that specifically to that person's welfare and the welfare of all beings is said to create the cause for their rebirth in a pure land or a higher realm. It actively helps them. The source also mentions practices like sur offerings, ritually burning specific substances like roasted flour, butter, sometimes sugar, which are described as providing a kind of subtle nourishment for the deceased in the Bardo state.
Wow. Okay. The book also provides incredibly direct and practical instructions, both for the person who is actually dying and for those helping them.
Yes, very clear advice.
For the dying person, the advice is, well, clear and compassionate. Accept that death happens to everyone. Try to let go of attachment to loved ones, possessions, power, status. Confess and mentally purify any misdeeds before enlightened beings, or just with sincere regret, promise not to repeat them.
And importantly, rejoice.
Right. Rejoice in your virtuous deeds, however small they seem, and rejoice in having encountered these liberating teachings, this path, during your life. Most importantly, the source says, try to die with faith and joy, relying on the three jewels, the Buddha as your guide, the Dharma as the path, and the Sangha, the community, as your support.
And specific visualizations are often recommended.
Yes, remember and visualize the Buddha of infinite light, Amitabha, and his blissful Pure Land, Sukhavati. Visualize his blessings flowing into you, purifying you. And visualize your consciousness exiting peacefully through the cranial aperture at the moment of death.
And for those supporting the dying person, the message is equally important, perhaps even more so in some ways. Remain peaceful yourself, calm, deeply respectful in their presence. Avoid saying or even thinking anything negative, agitated, or upsetting around the dying person. The source is quite strong on this. It says their mind is incredibly sensitive, and disturbance could strongly influence their journey, potentially pushing them towards a painful rebirth.
So, maintain a peaceful atmosphere. What else? The book advises providing blessed substances, if possible and appropriate. Things like blessed pills or water that can be eaten or drunk, or blessed cords that can be worn if the person is still conscious. Using sacred diagrams or mandalas may be worn during life, perhaps placed on the body or cremated with it. And crucially, perform purification practices and dedicate merits immediately after death and consistently for some time on behalf of the deceased.
Absolutely. The support continues after the physical death. And finally, we come to rebirth or reincarnation. The book presents this as, a major pillar in many Eastern belief systems. It notes support for this idea from various sources, including accounts of people claiming to remember past lives, and also stories from the Buddha's own previous lives, which are recounted in texts like the Jataka tales.
And as we discussed earlier, rebirth into one of those 6 realms of samsara is presented as being determined by the karmic patterns we've created during life. Driven by those 6 root afflictions we talked about: hatred, greed, ignorance, desire, jealousy, arrogance.
Yes, the dominant affliction tends to propel rebirth in a corresponding realm. And the source specifically mentions that the intensity of the emotion behind the action, the karma, matters significantly. Stronger negative emotions lead to more difficult rebirths.
But the book also presents the possibility that with sufficient positive karma and maybe some mental training, one might actually have a degree of choice in their next rebirth, or at least navigate towards a better outcome.
Yes, particularly the ability to recognize and aim for a pure land. In the Bardo state, you might see signs of potential birthplaces. These are sometimes described as different colored lights corresponding to different realms or possibilities. The advice, once again, is to avoid falling into attachment, fear, or confusion when these arise. Try to consciously choose your desired destination, maybe a pure land represented by a specific light, by moving towards it mentally. All the while focusing your mind on meditation, on your chosen deity, or other sources of blessing, and constantly remembering that the frightening appearances are ultimately unreal, just projections of your own mind. Don't be swayed by them.
So there you have it. We've journeyed through this incredibly rich Tibetan Buddhist perspective. From the fundamental nature of human life, its preciousness, its challenges, through the intricate process of dying and the often misunderstood experiences of the intermediate Bardo state, to the possibilities of transformation, purification, and the whole cycle of rebirth.
And the central thread woven through absolutely everything, connecting every single stage, is the profound power of the mind. not just in that crucial hour of death, but the habits, the tendencies, the karmic patterns we cultivate throughout our entire lives, moment by moment.
Yeah. This deep dive into the source material, it offers more than just a glimpse into a different worldview, fascinating as that is. It provides incredibly practical advice, really, centered on training the mind, on purifying negative tendencies and actively cultivating positive ones, right here, right now, as the fundamental way to shape your future, including whatever lies beyond this life.
So, listening to all this, what insights or maybe practical pieces of advice stand out most to you from this perspective?
It certainly gives you a lot to think about. And here's maybe a final thought to mull over, something to take away. If our experiences after death, according to the source, are indeed merely reflections, projections of our own karmic tendencies and mental habits, what does that imply about the reality we perceive right now, in this life? How much of this is also projection?